Welcome. My name is Jeanette Magnus, and I'm the director of the Center for Global Health at the University of Oslo here in Norway. The Center for Global Health is, in collaboration with the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, and 3 other University of Oslo centers, UIO Nordic, UIO Energy, and the Center for Development and Environment, hosting the Norwegian launch of the 2020 report of the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change, just one day after the main global launch in London. This report, penned by 120 world-leading experts from 38 academic institutions and UN agencies, addresses 43 indicators highlighting the interconnectedness of health and climate change. The actions called for warrant radical collaboration, and we hereby seek to mobilize the Norwegian academic milieu to action for planetary health to protect human health. We have an exciting program ahead of us with Norwegian academicians and policymakers with wide-ranging experience and expertise. I will now give the word to today's moderator, Professor Vebjørn Bakken, Director of UIO Energy. Over to you, Vebjørn.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. It is indeed an honor to be moderating this event. And on behalf of all the co-organizers, I would like to thank the Center for Global Health for inviting us in and for a very inclusive process leading up to this event. Now, before we start, I just want to underscore some housekeeping for this event. When you registered, you agreed to the session being recorded so that we can make the link available to anyone not being able to join us live. All participants will also receive a link to the recording next week. And I should add that all participant microphones and videos will be switched off inactive throughout the event. This webinar will be a series of presentations followed by a panel discussion at the end, where you will be able to have the opportunity to interact by posing questions through the Q&A box. So we encourage you to use this, ask questions there. The Q&A box is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can either do this under your own name or you can do it anonymously. I am very pleased to introduce the first speaker of today's event, Vice Rector at the University of Oslo, Åse Gorniska.
Thank you, Vebjørn. Distinguished guests, dear colleagues, I am happy and honored to be here today. This is an important event, an event and a report heralding a heavy message on human symptoms of climate change. The report says that the trends documented constitute the most worrying outlook since the Lancet Countdown was first established. So when I say I'm happy to be here, that's maybe inappropriate. The prospects are indeed grave. Even if you don't care about the health of the planet or the future of the globe, you care about your health. Establishing that there is a link between health and climate change, analyzing this link, and communicating this link puts an uncomfortable but necessary torchlight on the adverse effect of climate change on the very quality of life of our children, our parents, our partners, and ourselves. In this respect, each and every one of us should be on the mailing list for this report. Mind you, there are still those for whom hard facts are not enough, apparently. But if we prefer fact over fake, realism over wishful thinking, climate action over inertia, we recognize climate change and public health as truly wicked problems that are interlinked in complex ways. So interlinked that we also have to think about outside the box when we design policies and implement policies and engage in what I would call regulatory innovation. Thanks to the collective efforts of experts and academic communities, we are much closer now to specifying what the connections are. This gives ground for more effective and possibly also more legitimate interventions. Yet we seem to know less about under what conditions climate action accelerates. So we need research that asks the question, what does it take to accelerate climate action? We rely on science to bring solutions to decision makers. Yet in the case of climate change and climate health, The role of science is also to identify, conceptualize, and bring problems to the table. This provides us with a language that frames the discussion. In the world of wicked problems, reframing policy can be a real game changer. Health policy becomes climate policy becomes health policy. The report's observations give us, as research-intensive universities, some serious challenges with consequences for our research foci and for what we teach our students. The report also challenges national and sectoral divides, as well as scientific disciplinary divides. We truly rely on deep scientific specialization and long-term fundamental research. We need also to engage in a plurality of approaches, and I'm glad to observe that the cross-disciplinary approach is evident in the excellent program put together today. And also when we see who have cooperated to organizing this seminar. We're truly grateful to you all. The 2020 Lancet Countdown reports highlights a grave message, most certainly. Yet the report also points to ways forward. And I'm certainly looking forward to an enlightening conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Åse. So as you heard, at the heart of today's event is the 2020 Lancet Countdown report. And we are extremely happy to have one of the co-authors of the report present today. Melissa Lott is a senior research scholar at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University, where she leads the Power Sector and Renewables Research Initiative. Melissa is internationally recognized for work in the electricity and transportation sector. And we are very much looking forward to an introduction and to some of the key findings from the report. Please go ahead, Melissa.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's really lovely to join you in what is early morning where I am on the West Coast in the United States today. So let me see very quickly if I can share my screen. There we go. Just checking everyone can see this, yes? Wonderful, perfect. I love it when it works the first time, wonderful. So again, my name is Melissa Lott, and I'm a senior research scholar at something called the Center on Global Energy Policy within Columbia University. And I've also been an author on the Lancet Countdown report since their inception. I actually joined when we were working on the report that launched the countdown that essentially said, you know, the Lancet has been working to better understand these links between health and climate change for 3 decades, and we need to start tracking what is going on. What are the health effects we're feeling today? I feel that often, you know, we fall into a sense of complacency thinking, oh, if we need to respond to emissions by mid-century, hit net zero, these types of things, that means that we aren't feeling the health effects of climate change already. And that is simply not true. And that is so clear in the evidence and the research. To our introductory remarks to the facts and the data are very clear on this. So this year, our report focuses in on responding to the converging crises. So the converging crises of the health impacts of climate change and also of COVID-19, recognizing the place that we are in today as we around the world are experiencing this pandemic, and realizing that as we recover from this pandemic, as we come out of it next year, what we need to do to come back better and stronger and to respond to these converging crises. So I'm going to quickly go through, you know, some of the results from this year's report, but I wanted to highlight again that this is the 5th report that we've done, and each year we have worked to increase what we're representing, how we're representing it, to look at the different methodologies behind all of our indicators, and to say, what do we know today? What does the science tell us, and how can we do this better every single year? And by better, I mean to more strongly connect climate change and its impact on human health and the evidence base that we are presenting each year. We have 38 countdown partners around the world, including not just my university, but my former university, University College London, and a number of different universities. This year, we actually are proud to say that we published our first Lancet Countdown for China, which comes from our partners at Tsinghua University, and is a very interesting report if you're looking at the global impacts of climate change and how they're affecting our health around the world and what different countries are looking to do about it. In terms of the 2020 indicators, for those who followed the previous reports, I wanted to highlight kind of the new indicators that we have presented this year. This is part of our overall effort to say, what are we covering? Are we covering it the best way? And what is the science allowing us to say now that maybe it wasn't as clear 5 years ago, what we could say on those topics? Or maybe we didn't have the resources to cover it as we wished we had when we first kicked off. So we have 43 indicators in the 2020 report. New indicators this year include heat-related mortality, migration and population displacement, which is part of our overall efforts to more better capture mental health impacts of climate change, access to urban green space, and a number of others that you can see here on the screen. There are a number of different messages that come from the report that I will just, highlight at the very beginning. First, it does, as we said in the introduction, reveal the worst outlook for public health since its inception. And this is something as I personally, try to be an eternal optimist about some things and focus on the opportunities and how we can make things better. But the numbers are stark. We're not responding quickly enough, and no country in the world and no person in the world is immune from the health impacts of climate change. Now, people around the world are all affected, but we are not all affected equally, which is another point that we tried to emphasize in this year's report, the disproportionate impacts on certain parts of the population, including some of our most vulnerable populations. And it's clear that unless urgent action is taken, the health impacts of climate change will just increasingly threaten our lives and livelihoods and compromise the hospitals and clinics that we depend on. And that's why some of our indicators focus specifically on what is being done within our healthcare systems to respond. Because if the reality is that we are already feeling these health impacts, then we need to have systems in place to help us manage them as we simultaneously mitigate future impacts. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic, as I said, and climate change represent this converging crises. That's how we're representing them in the report. This year's wildfires and tropical storms, they've tragically shown us that we don't have the luxury of waiting, and I'll just put it that way. And as we respond to climate change, the optimistic part of these things, and as we respond to the pandemic and we recover, we can actually make sure that we do it in such a way that we recover better, that we recover cleaner, and that we recover in a way that simultaneously mitigates climate change and also supports the livelihoods of people around the world. Aligning the global recovery from COVID-19 is something that we at the Lancet Countdown this year are calling a triple win. So a triple win being that we could improve public health, create a sustainable economy, and protect the environment if we do it right. Unfortunately, signals to date are not as strong as we might wish they would be. But there are some encouraging actions in different countries around the world, in Asia and Europe, et cetera, that show us that this is possible and there is an appetite for it. And fundamentally, as I'll say when we go through a couple of indicators, there's more attention to this topic than there ever has been before. One could say that there's not enough, but when I look back at when I started on this work with this particular team, if not before that as well, the numbers are very encouraging. How many more countries are taking on this problem and realizing that it's affecting them today? So with that, I'm going to go into just a subset. Don't worry, I'm not going to in the next 10 minutes try to go through all 43 indicators. There is such a wealth of information behind each of these indicators. And one thing I'll say at the onset is that anyone who wants to understand how we calculate these things, who does them, what data we use, etc., all of that information is available online through our data visualizer and through the appendix to the main report. So the main report includes what we found, but then in the appendix, you can see documentation on every single methodology so that this is a transparent process. So in the different working groups we have at the Lancet Countdown, one of them, the first one, focuses on climate change impacts, exposures, and vulnerabilities. And in this year's report, we focus in on a couple of different things, specifically health-related mortality and wildfires, which I'll highlight here today. And as you'll see here on the screen, from 2000 to 2018, heat-related mortality for vulnerable people in the population of 65 years and over has increased by 53%, almost 54%. And in 2018 reached about 296,000 deaths. Now, this is a combination of things, including more days of high heat, defined as 3 or more days in a row of heat over a certain threshold, but also an aging population in a number of places in the world. Let me go to the next slide. And then on the topic of wildfires in this indicator, we found that in 114 countries, there's been an increase in the number of days that people were exposed to very high or extremely high risk of danger from fire. And I will say, as a person sitting in Southern California with winds blowing around and power lines sparking, I feel this one quite acutely, as what we have experienced on the West Coast of the United States this year. This increased risk translated to an increase in population exposure in 128 countries around the world, as we see here. Apologies. The other thing that I'll highlight is around food security and undernutrition. When we look at different crop yields and we look at how quickly crops are maturing and what that means for the overall yield of crops, we are seeing a concerning trend, a continued concerning trend. And while there are many factors that go into the amount of food that is produced, this overall trend in terms of decreasing crop yields raises very strong red flags about the future and what we will need to do to ensure that we have food security and that food security increases over time and that we do not continue to struggle with undernutrition. With that, I'm going to go into the working group 2, which is about adaptation planning and resilience for health. And again, a lot of this focuses in on our healthcare system and whether or not is prepared to respond to this health impacts of climate change and the health threats that we're already feeling. And I'll focus on one indicator from this group, though I would encourage, of course, everyone to go through the different indicators and dig into them in more detail. And one thing that I'll say is the encouraging point is that 50% of countries surveyed in the data behind this indicator have developed national health and climate change strategies or plans. This is a significant increase, a doubling in the period of time that I've been looking at these numbers. But on the flip side, while they may have plans, funding remains a key barrier to implementation. Only 9% of countries are reporting that they actually have the money, the dedicated funds to implement these plans. So they have great ideas and great concepts and great plans, but not the money to actually implement them. This is the group that I'm a part of, the Mitigation Actions and Health Co-Benefits. And as someone who works in the energy sector, I feel keenly both the impacts of the energy sector on contributing to climate change, but also the opportunity, if we transition the sector effectively and quickly, to protect health and improve health around the world. So I will resist temptation to go into all the indicators for my own working group, but I will focus in on a couple very quickly. One is around the coal phase out. Now, if you go back to the report that we released before the countdown began, and in that report we recommended that we have a countdown, but we made a couple of other very clear recommendations, and one of them was that we phase out coal use for power generation around the world, and that we phase out coal use because of its health impacts, because we have other alternatives that make sense today that we can use that will protect health, provide energy access, etc., but in a way that doesn't make our air dirty and make us sicker. In 2018, global energy supply from coal was at 1.2% higher than in 2017 and 74% higher than in 1990. So you can see that in the gray bars in the background on this particular graph here. And so you can see that we actually are still continuing to use more coal than we did before. The geography of that has shifted, but we still continue to use quite a bit of it. Now, one thing that is encouraging, however, if you look at the top line on this graph, that's China. If you care about emissions from coal, you care about China. And when you look at those numbers, what you can see is actually the share of electricity generation from coal is starting and has been steadily declining for a number of years now. Now, that does not mean that total generation is on its way down or on its way out, but it is encouraging to not see a continued increase in the use of coal in that country, which is so pivotal in the overall global trends. Again, when we talk about electricity, when you look at zero carbon emission electricity, the average annual growth rate in power generation from wind and solar and these clean generation resources is rising very, very rapidly. And all forms of low carbon energy now represent about a third of total electricity generation worldwide. And that was in the last year that our data are available. Of course, we're using data and having a retrospective, so we don't have 2020 numbers, obviously, as the year has not finished. But this is very encouraging that in a lot of parts of the world, we are using more zero carbon emission electricity and phasing out carbon intense resources. Now in working group 4 of 5, we focus on economics and finance, and we look about the economics of the zero carbon transition and zero carbon economies, and the health and economic losses from climate change and the benefits from mitigation. And I'll focus in on one thing here, which is the cost of heat-related mortality. While it may be hard to think about lives and livelihoods in terms of these just pure economic terms, it is important to understand the cost of the health impacts that we're implementing on ourselves. The monetized value of global heat-related mortality is on the rise. It increased from 0.23% of the gross world product in 2000 to 0.37 in 2018. Europe was the worst affected in 2018, with costs equal to the average income of 11 million of its citizens, or 1.2%, a very large number compared to the global average of regional gross national income. The second thing I'll say from this group is about talking about investments in zero carbon energy, and going back to the points and the indicators I spoke of earlier. When we look at where we are investing our money, we see that progress has stalled. So as much as we're seeing more generation from zero carbon energy resources, electricity resources, we're seeing that investments in zero carbon energy and energy efficiency have not increased since 2016 and are a long way from doubling by 2030, which is what is required for us to be consistent with Paris Agreement targets. But on an optimistic note, one thing that I mentioned earlier is that when we look at public and political engagement, we see awareness of this topic growing around the world, which is very, very encouraging. And I'll briefly mention just a couple of the indicators here. Although total coverage in climate change increased substantially, as you can see at the end of this bar from 2018 to 2019 on that line, the rise was even greater for coverage of health and climate change, which increased by 96% during this period. This is something very interesting to me. I can remember when we started this work and we were, Hillary and her team were pulling together the different data points about how often climate change and health were linked in the media and in the popular discussion. And it was disturbingly perhaps rare, at least disturbingly to us who were so keenly and acutely aware of the issues that we were already facing. Well, that is slowly changing. We are seeing this increase. And I feel that when this topic is actually entering the public discourse and public discussion, that means that pressures are rising for us to respond to it. So again, these are the three main, summary and perspective statements that we have coming out of this year's report. Last year, we focused in, if you're interested on children and pediatric health, we focused on the impacts of climate change on the health of children, highlighting how the health of children born today, every single one of them will feel these health impacts. And this year, we contextualized everything around COVID-19 and what we're experiencing today, and highlighted that while no country is immune from these health impacts, and while all of us are affected, not everyone is affected the same ways, and the most vulnerable among our population are affected disproportionately. So with that, I will leave it. I think I've managed to be a minute under, so success. And if anyone has questions, please feel free to reach out anytime. We're always happy to speak about this.
Thank you so much, Melissa, both for your important contribution to this work and also for being here to convey both the seriousness and urgency that we're seeing. This was quite sobering to hear, with a few glimmers of hope, at least here. So as you said, you will join the panel afterwards. So keep posting those questions in the Q&A box here. One of the benefits of having a digital event is that one does not have to be in the right place. In fact, you don't even have to be there at the right time. So we would obviously have loved to have him online with us. We are very happy to have received the recorded greeting from Sveinung Rotevatn, the Norwegian Minister of Climate and Environment. Let's see what he has to say.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to help launch this very important and timely report. Climate and health are closely linked. The previous Lancet Countdown reports have exposed and brought the world's attention to this important fact. They add to the long list of reasons why we must do everything we can to limit climate change. Climate change is a threat to our health because it undermines the access to clean air and clean water. It also increases the risks of extreme weather, malnutrition, and the spread of diseases. Many of the root causes of climate change, like deforestation, also increase the risk of infectious diseases and potentially also new epidemics. We're now seeing increasing evidence that exposure to air pollution increases the risks of death from COVID-19. The sources of air pollution and climate change are often the same. Policies to reduce air pollution is therefore a win-win strategy for both health and climate. According to the World Health Organization, climate change will contribute to the loss of 250,000 lives annually from 2030. The main causes being malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat strokes. The costs are estimated to be between $2 to $4 billion a year. It is clear that we need to act. The Paris Agreement sets out our shared path to reduce emissions together, to build resilient and robust societies, and to mobilize finance and support. This year, all countries should submit enhanced nationally determined contributions and take ambitious actions to reduce emissions. Norway's new and strengthened target is to reduce emissions with at least 50%, heading towards 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. Now we are working on a plan for how to strengthen our domestic policies. I hope we can conclude this year by seeing enhanced targets from all countries, and especially the biggest emitters. This is the only way we can limit the severe risks and seize the opportunities highlighted in this important report. Thank you so much for your attention, and good luck with the rest of the launch.
Thanks to Sveinung for also that call to action, I would say, which is very encouraging. Now, our next speaker should be well known to any Norwegian researcher that tries to get funding for the research. However, Jon Arne Røttingen has now joined the Ministry for Foreign Affairs as a special advisor on global health. He is currently coordinating an international collaboration initiated by WHO, the World Health Organization, to evaluate the effect of a potential treatment for the coronavirus. We are looking forward to hear your perspectives on this. Please go ahead, Jon Arne.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the University of Oslo for putting these important issues on the agenda. Very good. No, first, I would just like to congratulate Melissa, Anthony Costello, and the team for just fantastic work. Grim prospects, but really important work. And we need data, we need indicators, we need evidence to actually inform policy making. So I would like to share some perspectives from the health and development side. And my first starting point, maybe naturally, given the health background and my own involvement, is the COVID-19 pandemic. I think it has definitely, to all of us, demonstrated our collective vulnerability within countries, between countries. We are all affected. We are affected across countries, across geographies, ethnic groups, social structures, also within countries. And we see also social inequalities in how the pandemic is hitting. What we also see is that health is a high priority to all of us. And in a way, it's among those basic sort of factors we value the most. So what we also have seen is that health is actually overriding many other values and other issues that individuals are prioritizing. So we are willing to stay at home. We are willing to have home offices. We are willing to reduce our contacts to sort of protect our health. And I think actually in this context, we should see that as an opportunity, because then health indicators can be in many ways the human face of for what many in the society are difficult to understand, the more gradual environmental changes that climate change is a part of and is also very much driving. Because it becomes, the issues becomes closer, nearer, and actually something that it affects them. So in many ways, health is a climate barometer. And I think that is in a way, some of the core messages in your report. That actually by demonstrating health impacts from climate change, both what is happening and what will happen, we have a powerful communication tool. And in that way, physicians and nurses and health professionals are in a way, both doctors for the patients, but also doctors for the patient Earth. We also heard, and I will not repeat the excellent summary given by Melissa, but we see that the issues related to heat waves, extreme weather events, disasters caused by these, flooding, droughts, wildfires, and then linked drivers, air pollution, increasing vulnerabilities due to the epidemics like the current pandemic, food security and food safety issues, and then also in a way the imbalances in nutrition and food consumption all are leading to different disease threats. And as we know, climate change itself and these drivers of climate change affect the disadvantaged groups disproportionately. These inequalities are visible to health professionals because they see them in the clinics, in the offices. So my message, speak out, be responsible citizens as health professionals, because you have a role to play, not only for your individual patient, but also as, in a way, communicators of this health parameter. And this also speaks to the global responsibility to compensate for these effects. So I'm talking about the distributional differences and on the disadvantage. And I think health professionals also has a role then to communicate this. But finally, we have the diagnosis. I'm a doctor, and so what? Because the diagnosis is not enough. How can the health system and the health sector contribute more? and can we do more? Because actually the SDG 3 is a sustainable development goal where there are very little trade-offs. There are mostly actually synergies with many of the other sustainable development goals. And there are co-benefits or synergies between the health goal and the climate goal among the sustainable development goals. And I would just highlight one, and that is also linked then to the sustainable development goal number 7, energy. I see that Melissa, you are from the Energy Policy Center, which is, of course, you know much more about this than me. But the point that actually the way we now use energy or provide energy is also both detrimental to health and detrimental to the climate. It's really important. We have very serious air pollution issues related to domestic air pollution due to unclean cooking practices. And we need to invest in cleaner cooking stoves all across the world. And this will have a huge impact if we can make that transition and use these opportunities as a crisis to actually make that transition. And the other issue I wanted to highlight is the need now to also make sure that we deliver electricity in a clean way to health facilities, the cold chains of vaccines and so forth. It's estimated that 1 billion of the health facilities that provide healthcare to the human population, so 1 billion of the population is covered by health facilities who do not have the proper electrification and proper sustainable energy. So there are strong links between health and development and climate change, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jon Arne. So you will also join the panel. So please, if you have questions here directed to Jon Arne, post them in the Q&A. Now, knowledge plays a key role in solving the wicked problems the world is currently facing. And our next speaker will talk about the role the universities can and perhaps should play to make the world a more sustainable place. Dag Hessen is a professor in biology at the University of Oslo, and he's also leader for the Interdisciplinary Research Center for Biogeochemistry in the Anthropocene. Dag, please tell us more about the UNESCO's call to universities.
Thank you, and thanks for being invited here for, as all of you have said, this important event. So I'll end with the UNESCO call, but start with the big pictures. That is the topic of our center. It's climate, nature, and health combined. And of course, as we all know, there are some planetary boundaries. These have become more and more visible, and we are exceeding a number of these and approaching an even larger part of this. So we are currently using approximately 2 globes annually, and some are using more than others. And the center I'm leading is called the Center of Biogeochemistry in the Anthropocene. And to many of you, I guess the concept of the Anthropocene is well known. There are many reasons why we name it this, but probably some of the most important are here. The pretty obvious one is that we have changed the atmospheric gas composition to a degree that really causes a warming, especially with CO2. And we also know that we have a remaining capacity for emissions that we will hit the roof, at least when it comes to 1.5 degree, within less than 10 years from now with the current emissions. But this is not only about climate, it has also to do with nature degradation. And it also worth reminding that the global population of animals have been decreasing, the global nature is decreasing, and just a kind of fun fact, probably not really fun fact either, but at least the fact is that we have no biomass ratio of terrestrial vertebrates like you can see here. We completely dominate. What's left to wild animals from mouse to elephant is 4%. The rest is monopolized by ourselves and our animals. And we have degraded wetlands, forest, land surface, coastal systems, and so on dramatically. And every year there is calculated a Earth Overshoot Day, should actually be called a Earth Undershoot Day, where we have overused the resources for that day. And this day comes earlier for each year. Last year it was by the end of July. It's a bit later this year, actually, thanks to COVID-19. And I think a very important take-home message here is that it's very important also in the context of climate to keep on this largest of all ecosystem services, the Earth's capacity to sequester carbon. More than half of our emissions is taken up by a net uptake on land and oceans. And the problem today is that we are degrading the capacity by cutting forests, by forest fires, by heating up soils, wetlands are drying up, we thaw the permafrost. Also the oceans becomes warmer and more acidic, and all this dampens down the capacity to sequester carbon and increases the likelihood of emissions of carbon, and in the worst case also methane from this ecosystem. So this is a kind of vicious feedback that we are facing and might be facing even stronger, and that could eventually lead into kind of regional or even global tipping points. And of course, in this context of health, as many have pointed to already, nature loss and zoonosis is pretty obvious. We have known this for a long time, but it became really apparent now in the COVID-19 situation. So not only the wet market, but the way we penetrate into nature, eat meat, bush meat, and also bring our animals in closer contact with natural animals, causes zoonosis of a wide range to break out, and this will likely increase. It has increased dramatically over the past decades, and it's likely to decrease even more. So this is yet another reason for taking care of nature also in the context of climate. And I really love this cartoon. It's these two guys in white coats that look at the familiar corona bumps that we were studying this spring without being aware of the much larger risks that races back to the bigger waves in terms of climate change and nature loss. And I think we are in a kind of tipping point situation right now. We've been for a long time. 2019 was a kind of wake up year, and this has been accentuated by the current situation with COVID-19. So we could either tip back to business as usual or even overcompensate with the risk of turning the planet into a hothouse globe, or we could use the situation, the increased awareness, and also the COVID-19 situation to tip in the other direction towards more sustainable Earth. But I think this is a really 50-50 situation. In this context comes then the UNESCO initiative that, of course, takes departure from the fact that poverty, inequality, climate, nature, and degradation and health are closely linked. And universities should not only improve their internal practice, but they should really set the agenda. We have a major role in setting values, provide transdisciplinary knowledge, and provide the right education, research and outreach. So this report has huge ambitions. It should be launched 1 year from now, apparently, or slightly less. And it has the ambitions, nonetheless, to generate the deep-going social, economic, and environmental transformations needed. So university has a huge responsibility here. So I hope I can come back and tell more about this initiative. We will actually have a first meeting later today, and we have already started writing on this. And who knows, perhaps this also could end up as a kind of Lancet report. One of the motivations here for what we're doing are, in fact, the Lancet EAT report that I think was really an example to follow up. Yeah, then my 6 minutes are out, so thank you.
Thank you, Doug. And I promise we'll pick up on this call to the universities in the Q&A session at the end, certainly. So as we've already heard today, public health and climate change is certainly not just about public health and climate change. Things are interlinked here. And the next two speakers will bring in perspectives from specific sustainable development goals. First, we have Tanja Winther, professor at the Center of Development and the Environment, and also the center leader for Include, a research center for socially inclusive energy transition. Tanja will give us perspectives from SDG 7, clean energy, and SDG 12, sustainable consumption. Please, Tanja, tell us more.
Many thanks, and thanks for inviting me to come here. Yes, I head Include, which is a new research center on socially inclusive energy transition. And I thought I would use this opportunity to talk about equitable energy transitions and why we focus on equity and justice. Now, as we all know, there's an urgent need to transform our energy systems. If we take everything on board, it's 70% of all emissions stem from energy, from production, distribution to end use, and also the indirect energy embodied in the goods we consume, in the infrastructures and materials we use. So energy is important. And the municipalities have been attributed an important role in implementing solutions towards a low carbon society. So we work closely with them also to understand how they can create these solutions in an effective way and also in a socially inclusive and just way. Now, currently, there's a lot of emphasis on smart cities and how to make life in urban areas more sustainable. But there is also a risk here that we lose out of looking at other types of contexts. So we find it very important also to look at other types of municipalities and their challenges. So we asked together with them, how can they create attractive local communities, which are both sustainable and socially inclusive? And obviously the need for jobs is also part of this picture. Now, we also dwell into people's everyday lives and the routines, and everything is very much habits and so on, and also how they commute to work and so on. So the daily life is where we somehow start from, the practice theoretical framework. But here it's very important to realize that different groups have different positions and needs and resources. So for example, in Norway, there are plans to introduce tariffs for electricity, which might become, so that it might become cheaper during nighttime and more expensive in the afternoon to use electricity. So here we ask what kind of groups would have the interest and capacity and possibility to invest in automatic smart home systems to regulate their heat. So this woman here might be in a very different position from a young couple with a Tesla and panels on their roofs. Now, I have had the chance to do research in Zanzibar and other African countries and India, and among people who live in energy poverty. And I've also observed close up how they also struggle with health issues when carrying this pile of logs every day, every week, several times, and also the indoor pollution that was mentioned earlier. But we don't have to travel all the way to Zanzibar to observe energy poverty. So here is a quote. Most people say that they just cover up when they get cold, but I get ill. I get flu-like symptoms in my body. And then I begin to ache. Yes, you get terribly tired if you have to spend time in pain. So this was a woman in Oslo last winter talking to the student who did his master study. And he received several of these accounts that during the winter, when also prices in Norway go up for electricity, we often heat our homes with them. They get into pain, and there is also the social pain of not having a warm enough house or flat to invite people into. So they feel ashamed not being able to be social. So to sum up why we focus on social inclusion and equity, this is this matter of urgency, which everybody knows here. That it's so urgent to find the solutions, and we don't have time to waste. And there's increasing recognition of the need to have solutions that become accepted by people. Otherwise, you can get protests like this case from Norway a couple of years back against the toll roads. So it's kind of pragmatic argument. You need people on board before you can make efficient solutions. But it's not necessarily so that the most vocal people are the most vulnerable. So we find a very important need here to look at social structures, understand the situation, and then use energy justice as a promising way to examine how the effects of measures span out in real life. So in this framework, there are 3 dimensions. So the first is distributional. So what are the goods and how is the distribution of costs and benefits on different groups? What is at stake? And then recognition, who are considered as legitimate stakeholders and who are ignored. and who bears responsibility, which also brings us back to decision-making and governance, and how, the procedural aspects. So I find it very interesting to see, and I learned from one of our partners in Include, the Health Directorate, that in the Norwegian Public Health Act, there's this explicit focus to reduce social health differences as a way to work towards public health. So this is us then. We are going to do empirical studies in the time to come. 8 years is our time span here, and we have engaged partners and researchers. So please visit our home site. There is a newsletter, and please contact us if you have any questions or want to engage in dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tanja. And you can also follow up with answers if people post them in the Q&A. Now, I'll happily admit that I kind of have a thing for SDG number 7, as you can see in the background, but I do realize that the primary source of energy for us humans is actually food. So our final speaker will give us insights on sustainable food production linked to SDG number 2, Zero Hunger. Siri Fjellheim is a professor and the vice director for research at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. She leads a research group of biologists working with ecology and evolution of plants and how species evolve to conquer new terrain. So please tell us more, Siri.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to the launch of this very important report. Reflecting on a sustainability goal in just 5 minutes is a rather complex task, but of course not as complex as dealing with the goal itself. So I will deal with this the way most of us do when we deal with complex tasks, focus on a tiny bit. So I am from the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, and at NMBU, almost all our activities, both when it comes to teaching, research, and innovation, is centered around sustainability. And our motto is joint efforts for a sustainable future. Our university is small but focused. Distances are short, both between buildings and between people. And if I use myself as an example, I'm a plant scientist, but I have collaborated and published together with people from all faculties, from veterinary sciences to physics. So why do I say this? It's because that at NMBU, we believe that to solve complex problems, we need to work together across disciplines. At NMBU, our research and education cover most, if not all, of the sustainable development goals. But as a plant scientist, my own research relates most to goal number 2, end hunger. In this goal lies to achieve food security for everyone, improve nutrition, and to promote sustainable agriculture. All people need food, and the human population is growing. Today, 2 billion people suffer from food insecurity. But at the same time, 1/3 of all the food that is produced is wasted. And Sustainable Development Goal 2 is the goal that has the most negative impacts on other development goals. Food systems account for 29% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Agriculture is responsible for 80% of global deforestation and 70% of the world's freshwater use. So I wonder if it's even possible to increase food production within the boundaries of the 2-degree increase in temperature and without negatively impacting other sustainability goals. Well, I'm an optimist by nature, and I think that we can solve this with science. And I think that we need people to believe that this can be done. So I want to talk about solutions. One of the things that's most fun with being the Pro-Rector of Research and Innovation is that I get to represent all the research that's done on NMBU. And I often find myself quite amazed of what my colleagues are working on. As the former agricultural college, we are, of course, still doing selection breeding to make better cultivars and breeds of food and animals. But not the classical way anymore, by going to the field and selecting 2 individuals with favorable phenotypes that we cross together to make a new generation. No, these days we do genomic selection in front of computers. We use combinations of a complex mathematical modeling with genome sequencing and phenotyping done by robots and drones. And in this way, we can reduce the time it takes to make new cultivars or breeds from 20 to 5 years. We are also working on developing completely new technology. For instance, robots that work independently in the field to spray pesticides on a particular part of the plant directly, thereby massively reducing the amount of chemicals used. Or even making robots that instead of using chemicals, illuminate strawberries with UV light directly to kill fungi. And these strawberries, they are bred to completely fit the movements of the robots. And sometimes completely crazy ideas emerge. What if we could eat wood? Can we eat wood? I think that we can eat wood, at least indirectly. A big challenge in Norway is that it's difficult to grow protein crops for feed. But scientists at NMBU have discovered an enzyme that is able to break down cellulose in wood leftovers from the forest industry or from algae. And this can then be used as feed to produce a protein-rich yeast that again can be used as feed for fish and production animals that we eat. And in this way, we don't have to import soya-based feed, and we also free arable land that instead can be used to produce food for people. These are just a few examples of solutions, and there are many more, but still not enough. So I cannot emphasize strongly enough that research will be essential to come up with even more solutions. But research in itself doesn't solve much. We also need to communicate to the outside world the results of what we're working on. And we have to work closely with policymakers, government, and industry to implement these solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siri. I get the idea that Norwegian wood might have another meaning based on what you're doing at NMBU. A big thanks to both you and all the other speakers, and also for staying on time. You've been extremely good here. So that means that we have quite a bit of time now for the panel discussion and picking up questions also from the audience. But I will start with a round, doing one question to each of you. So I'll just start with you, Siri, since you were last here. And basically picking up on what Dag was telling us about, this call for universities. So could you say a little bit more? You touched upon this, but could you say a little bit more about what the roles and responsibility of universities could be in creating a sustainable world?
Yeah, I did mention it briefly at the end of my talk, that we of course have a huge responsibility to generate new technology and new knowledge. But we also need to work to get this knowledge and findings out to the public. We need to reach decision makers so that they can have science-based facts when they take decisions. And I think we as researchers and as institutions need to contribute to turn our knowledge into innovations. I also think that more than ever, we have to stand tall as free and independent contributors of science. Because in many parts of the world, science is under attack, and people, they don't even believe in science. They don't believe in vaccines. They don't believe that evolution has happened. They don't believe that climate change is man-made. And I think that we are lucky in Norway that people in general has a large confidence in science, but I think also that we should not be naive and we should work to keep that position. And lastly, one important point is that we should not forget one of the major products of universities, which is our students. And I think that we can contribute significantly by producing candidates that are knowledgeable, responsible, and equipped to solve problems. And this is probably the quickest way that we can make large impact in society.
Thank you very much. And I certainly agree that that is a key role that we can play, educating people to do this change and transition, certainly. And I think also the students are very keen on being part of this change, and set, they are pushing us in many, many ways. So I'll just cover the panels I said going through. So I would like to move on to you, Melissa, and energy. I'm obviously, I think energy is really a key part of solving all of the crises that we have. And you showed some numbers here that are kind of, not too encouraging in terms of the change that is needed. So could you say a bit more how we can move our energy system quickly and effectively toward more sustainable sources, and away, particularly from coal, but also from other fossil sources?
Absolutely. Yeah, so in the energy sector, I mean, we're benefiting from a lot of things, including the rapid, more rapid than we expected, I think, drop in the price of, zero carbon electricity generation technologies is one example, like solar and wind and batteries. And one of the things that I know here in the US we're working on is how do we deploy that faster? Because as much as you look at these very impressive ramp up rates, like it's coming from such a small base, it looks incredible and it's impressive and we should celebrate it, but we should do more. And so how do we unlock that to be able to deploy as much as possible? And that's true around the world as quickly as possible. Electricity is one of those things that when you look at the research and the numbers and the analysis of how you have an affordable and rapid transition, you need to figure out how to decarbonize power and use a lot more of it and have universal access around the world. And this goes back to the SDGs, et cetera. And so really focusing on that and getting past what I often encounter, which is focusing on one technology or two technologies that you like, but rather saying, how do we get to zero carbon? Let's create policies and regulatory structures and markets to just enable whatever makes sense in that area and whatever communities, choose for their areas. If it goes to zero carbon, that's great. So how do we create structures like that?
Thank you. And as you told us just before you started, you are in an area that experienced blackouts right now, which also shows that there are challenges with it, not just producing the energy, but also distributing it with a robust energy system. So just I'll leave that for now. But just picking up on this distribution point, I would like to move to Jon Arne. You mentioned this in your slides about this cold chain. So that is one thing that I'm sort of worried about in all this, because there's a lot of talk about the fair distribution of vaccines and so on. But as you pointed out, you have to have the cold chain here all the way to last mile delivery. And having visited some of the rural parts of the world, it's certainly there's a lack of electricity and so on. And it must be kind of a little nightmare doing this and making sure that the vaccines are not spoiled before they get out to the users. Could you comment on this and what you're doing and how you see this can be solved?
Yeah, no, it's an important issue, definitely, and there have been large investments actually in solar power driven fridges and refrigerators over the last period. UNICEF has done very important work in doing so, and I think the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, Gavi, is also very much concerned about making sure that there is infrastructure in place and of course the ability to deliver the vaccines. But there are no easy fixes, and I believe new technology improvements, reducing costs so that the price is lowered due to scale and new innovations is the only main sort of sustainable driver. So definitely investing in clean energy technologies that can be used locally is also a strong investment in global public health.
Great, thanks. So staying on the pandemic, I would just like to move to you, Dag. You touched upon this as well. This link between the pandemic and nature degradation and so on. But could you just elaborate a bit more on this and what can we do? What are the exact challenges here, and what does the future hold? Or do we have to expect a pandemic every few years from now on?
Yeah, I can do that, but I also like to add a comment on the coal issue. I was in the Ethical Council for the State Pension Fund, and we tried many years to use the investment sector to divest from coal. And we see that there is a huge power here to direct investments in the right ways. So when finally the Norwegian state pension fund divested from coal, there was a large portfolio of investors that followed that. So of course, we need here to make alliances with all aspects and all fractions of the society, not only the technology part. So, but I think I will also warn that we should not lean back and assume that the green shift or the decoupling, you know, magically will take over. We need to keep a strong pressure of this. In this, even China still has 80% non-renewable energy. So, but yes, then to the nature losses. I think this is, as I said, another argument why it's important to have not only one eye at the CO2 and the climate change per se, but also how this is intimately linked with the nature degradation that continues. We just saw alarming numbers for the continuous degradation of the Amazon yesterday. For two reasons. One is, of course, that these systems are of immense importance to tackle the climate change by sequestering huge amounts of CO2. But we also see the other side of this, or at least one other argument is that the more we stay in contact and encounters into nature and interact with natural animals, the larger is the risk of zoonosis. And almost all animals are, of course, are host of different kinds of viruses, not only COVID-19 or corona, but a whole suite of viruses that at some point are likely to transmit to humans in a modified form. So if there are no other strong arguments that people would like to listen to, at least this situation would again call for a more urgent preservation of nature, I think. And likely, or not only likely, but for sure there will be other pandemics, but we can do something to reduce the risk of pandemics, and this is one of the measures we can take.
Great, thank you. And I think I'll also make a short jump and get Tanya involved here. You're doing important work in the Include Center here, because we really need the transition, but we also need a transition that is just. So even the head of the International Energy Agency said this very clearly about a year ago at the autumn conference, that the energy transition, it has to be just and socially inclusive and so on, if it's going to if we're going to be able to do this. Part of your center is bringing together different people. So again, you can relate it to SDG number 17 collaboration. So could you say a little bit about that part? What are the roles of the different partners here and users and research and so on together? How are you getting this to work, and how do you proceed?
Yes, so we started off by actually planning on a very, very close collaboration with practitioners, because we work here with solutions, and we know the municipalities, the people who actually on a daily basis work to provide the solutions. We need them on board to actually also formulate the questions. So the questions came up with a kind of a joint venture between critical social science research and practitioners. That's how we have based this. And so working with the municipalities, we thought in the beginning this might also be a problem, because they might want us to serve their needs in a very pragmatic way. Maybe they were not so interested in the critical part, but it turns out that they really are, and want to have this in-depth study of the social structures. But what is then striking is somehow how the municipalities, they work very broadly with their whole population. So they think about all kinds of aspects of social inclusion, environmental and jobs and everything. But when it comes to the electricity and energy sector, that is really where you have a kind of silo, not being very much in touch with other aspects of living. So also with all this emphasis on energy research, I think it's vital that we think from the start how energy is implicated in all these other services, rather than having the single focus on energy per se.
Great, thank you. So I'm very happy to see that we have received many good questions now through the Q&A from the audience. So I will start going through some of this, and it will be open to the panel who wants to answer. I might indicate who I think might be the right one, but the other ones are free to fill in. So I'll just start with the first one that I see here. in the Lancet report now, there's mentioning of the National Health Service in England that has very ambitious strategies here in decarbonizing the health sector, including all scopes, all direct and indirect emissions by 2040 or actually with an 80% reduction by 2028, which seems very, very ambitious. So the question to the panel is if they think this ambition can be achieved here in Norway, or are there talks about doing the same thing? So ambitious strategies here for the health sector in Norway. So I guess Jon Arne might be the right one to start here commenting.
Yeah, I guess I can start. And of course, the big difference between the UK and Norway is that we have a very good starting point because we have clean electricity, first and foremost. And it means that to actually reduce from that level is even more challenging when it comes to electricity sort of services and needs of the healthcare sector. So but definitely we shouldn't sort of rest on that fact. I think we can do a lot more. And I guess then, from my point of view, it would need to be focused on transport. And as you know, there's a lot of transport in the healthcare system to and from. And I think if we can go with a very clear ambition of no carbon transport in the healthcare system, I think that's a feasible ambition in Norway, given our penetration rate of electrical cars. So I would guess that is a driver, but others may have better ideas. Thank you.
Good, thanks. Comments from many other panelists? Dag?
Yeah, I can just add that this is the same issues that we deal with at university. Of course, we do not only have the ambitions to affect society in the right direction, but we should start with ourselves, as everybody should do. So we are also trying to see where to cut carbon emissions. And as Jon Arne says, obviously transportation is the really big issue together with heating. There are some paradoxes that probably those that are the most frequent flyers are the climate scientists, right? Traveling around for meetings to save the world. Of course, we cannot discard all meetings, but this has, I think, been an eye-opener that we really try to see where the university proceeds, and each and one of us can cut. And again, I think many have reflected upon that the current COVID-19 situation that have forced us to keep meetings like this, disputations, even scientific meetings, has of course by itself reduced the university footprint in terms of carbon significantly.
Great, thanks. Any other quick comments from the panel? Tanja?
Yes, I would just like to add, because we are in this privileged position of having all the renewable and also quite a rapid now shift towards electric vehicles, that a main challenge in Norway is really the embodied energy in consumption. That is the kind of key thing for sustainability and climate change emissions. And we work with that in Include. There was a question on that, also looking at the social equity in also embodied energy consumption.
Good, thank you. So staying in the healthcare sector, but a somewhat different topic, there is a question here that mental health is not yet a part of the Lancet Countdown. And I guess as we see now during COVID, mental health is also a big part of this and connected also with climate change. So any comments to that? Are there any plans to include this? Melissa?
I smiled when I saw the question, and thank you for it. Because it is something that I can remember when we were first brainstorming about what indicators we wanted to include. This was on our top list, and we have, struggled with how do we capture it. And this year, one of the new indicators is one of our first attempts to capture it. And I mean through the migration and population displacement indicator. But one thing that we do every year in the Lancet is we put out a call and we expose our vulnerabilities. We say, these are the things we want to capture, but we're not capturing as well as we could. And so if anyone in the audience, does research in this area and has thoughts on how to do it, please reach out. people reaching out after each of our publications have led to additional indicators and changes in our methodologies over time, and that's part of the process. But one of the things we are trying to capture with that migration and population displacement indicator is around the mental health stress of being forced from your home and community, and how many people are at risk of that. So thank you very much for the question. It's extremely important. And I think I saw some other hands go up that they wanted to respond.
Yeah, Dag, you also have a comment.
Yeah, I think the mental health here is also of immense importance, and both in the context of climate, but also land use or nature degradation. Clearly, the way, and we have lots of discussions of this, how should we disseminate the risk of climate change? And some, especially young people, lose their faith, lose their idea about future. I have young students that come and ask, is there any meaning of taking an education to plan for a family and so on when the future looks so grim? So of course we have to balance this, and this has to do also with a mental health issue, but also this preservation of green spots, especially those that are close to cities and where we live, is more and more recognized as a very important issue for mental health. There are in fact a growing number of studies now illustrating how immensely important this is for public health and well-being.
So picking up on that, we see that, as I comment on, the students are really impatient here, and they want to see changes and they want to contribute and so on. So could I just ask you, Sadie, to comment on this? We are, of course, educating people, and there are need for rapid changes here. But how can we really move quickly from producing the knowledge and educating people to actually action and things happening? This urgency that we have heard several of the speakers today address.
Yeah, so I think that we need to connect with the world outside academia and try to transfer our knowledge to the outside world. And I think that both as institutions and as individual researchers, we have to ask ourselves if we have anything to contribute. And then I think that institutions, they have to have systems to really help and support researchers that want to work with innovation. And I think that we need to work with society and industry to facilitate quick transfer of knowledge. But as I also said earlier, I think that the fastest way of getting our knowledge that we generate at universities out to society is through the students. And I think we need to, and I think the students are motivated. The students at NMBU they're top motivated to actually contribute to changes. I think that we need to equip them with also generic skills like problem solving skills, not theoretical only knowledge, because I think that the world is changing really fast. Unforeseen problems will show up, so we have to educate problem solvers. And I also think that continuing education will be very important, so that because education will be outdated, so we continuously need to update our own knowledge. And we do research-based teaching, and this is certainly a way of getting our knowledge quickly out to society, I think.
And I'll take the liberty of just adding myself as well. We are doing something at University of Oslo, and together with NMBU actually, called City Studio Oslo, which is doing sustainable city development as a course, a full semester course, where students are going out into the city, working on real projects and so on. So I think we're seeing some actions here that fits well with this and getting the students active even before they're finished their education. So any other comments related to action and students and so on, or otherwise I'll just move on to further good questions here. I don't see any hands. So I'll move back to you, Arne. There's congratulations to you here and to the Ministry for Foreign Affairs for this initiative. And they would like to hear from you how you think you may use your new position and your voice to forward the important work to reduce and prevent climate-related health issues, perhaps using the concept of planetary health and One Health.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So maybe I should be a bit formal first and say that this role is, of course, now linked to speaking on behalf of the Norwegian government. So I don't have a separate voice from actually the formal positions of Norway, and I'm supporting the Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Development on health-related issues. But definitely, I think, as I tried to also illustrate in my brief remarks, I think we need to take a planetary health approach to health. And one health perspectives, I think just the pandemic has illustrated the importance of that. Another question I saw was related to antimicrobial resistance. We actually need a much more holistic approach to understanding both the environmental and the social determinants of health. I also saw another old friend, Stefan Swartling Petersson, previously from UNICEF, challenging the fact that in a way internationally we are like at the national level, we are siloed. We have sectors with responsibilities for sectors. So in a way, the health sector has a responsibility for the health services, for the public health system, for prevention. But what we tend to forget is that the outcomes actually, and I think the SDGs is a nice illustration, the outcomes do have determinants across all sectors. And that's, in a way, the governance system, neither at the national level nor at the international level, has really managed to grasp that complexity. And of course, then if I was imperialistic on behalf of the sort of health professions, we would have sort of wanted to take a broader role. But I think we need to also be quite, not believe that we have a better understanding of other sectors' sort of main instruments. And I think we rather need to collaborate cross-disciplinary and cross-sectorial, because the environment sector, the climate, the energy will probably have the best instruments to actually also improve health conditions.
Okay, very good. A linked question here. This approach, One Health, human health, animal health, environmental health, is needed for tackling climate change. It's a question to you, Melissa. Does the current Countdown report use this term and encourage this approach? And if not, will future reports pick it up?
Yeah, so in the report as it stands, we've really focused on human health and human health impacts of climate change. In terms of if it will be included in future reports, it's always an ongoing conversation about what we include and how we include it. And so what I'd encourage is anyone who has feedback like this to reach out to us. We read every comment that comes in, and we take it seriously in our annual meeting, and we discuss what feedback have we gotten and how can we take that on and include it in the analysis that we're doing. So I'd encourage you to, share your thoughts on that and send it to us so that we can take that on in each of our meetings. And thank you for the question.
Good, thanks. And then I guess this is an open question, so whoever wants can answer it. The question says that most national and EU mitigation policies focus on energy. Do you think that this focus harms health by taking away the opportunity of framing climate change as a health issue? Melissa, and then Tanya.
So I'm curious what Tanya thinks on this one. For me, I think of energy as being a part of the solution set. I'm an engineer, so I say things like solution set. But I think of energy as being a major enabler of improving public health. I know that here in the United States, but in countries around the world, including in Europe, we struggle with the air pollution that's from energy. We struggle with the greenhouse gas emissions, another form of air pollution that's from energy. And so I look at the emphasis on energy as being a focus on the solutions and what we can do around it to enable, a net zero economy, a healthier economy. One thing I'll say is that I, find when we separate the conversations of energy and health as if they are somehow not interlinked. This goes back to the interdisciplinary discussions we've been having and comments people have made today. That's where we really lose out on opportunities. So when I'm dealing with rising numbers of children, instances of asthma in children in a certain community, I immediately look at the pollution sources and where they're coming from and how you can address them. And so that link is so strong. I feel we lose opportunities when we try to sever it because it shouldn't be severed and it can't be severed. Okay,
thank you. And I can say I didn't have time to read the report in detail, but I did a quick search and energy came up 126 times in the Countdown report. So I think that was fascinating. It's really integrated into all the different chapters almost now. But Tanya, you also had a comment here.
Yeah, no, I follow very much what Melissa was saying, but I think that there might be a danger that the realm of energy is somehow disappearing from the health, the important area of health. So maybe we should try to launch, a new reports on the energy health link specifically, where we could combine both mitigation and adaptation to climate change and focus on also the solutions within the realm of energy.
Great. Thank you. I'm just staying with you, Tanya. That's a question specifically to you, picking up on I think one of the last comments. Will your study also include equitable access to energy embodied in consumption? This is where you find a significant proportion of the Norwegian climate footprint, as was pointed out by you as well, I think.
Yes, we will. Embodied energy is important, and we collaborate with the INSAM and Civita, people who can also quantify the embodied energy consumption together with qualitative work on this aspect.
And then switching themes a bit, I think this is perhaps either to Dag or Jon Arne. My question is regarding antimicrobial resistance and climate change. Is there a link? And how can climate change interventions improve the AMR crisis? Do you want to start, Dag?
Yeah, well, I can try. I think at glance there should be no obvious link between antimicrobial resistance and climate change. Of course, there will likely be a spread of vectors and a spread of a number of diseases, including various zoonosis, but the antibiotic resistance, I cannot see a direct link here, but perhaps you know more about this than I do.
Oh, I agree with Doug. There shouldn't be any direct links. They are both sort of climate change is an evolutionary pressure, and we know that, of course, the use of antibiotics or other antimicrobials are also putting an evolutionary pressure on the microbes. But I think the commonalities are that we need a One Health approach, and I think one area where we actually have far too little understanding is the sort of environmental decontamination from industries and factories who produce antibiotics, and where there are leakages out into the environment, and where there will also be a pressure then on the naturally occurring microbes in the environment. And then that, of course, can be also bottlenecks that then will create new strains and new opportunities that again will cause harm. So I think the main commonality is the One Health approach, but not a direct link on the risks.
Good. Link to that, if we move from microbes to, I guess, slightly larger animals, please, can you suggest how best to balance the sometimes competing interest of environmental or animal health with human health? So it's back to One Health again, but this, there's a tension here. Doug?
Yeah, I could start on that. I think that's an immensely interesting question, and it has again to do with the way we use the land surface, the way we degrade nature, the way we convert nature into systems that produce food for us. And by now we have converted almost all land masses into supporting systems for ourselves. And of course, part of this is that we also have created a much more efficient food production, which is good for something, but bad for something. And clearly it's bad for animal welfare that you have this kind of industrialized food production system where animals are kept indoor. Of course, they can have soft surfaces to lie on, things like that. But by and large, this is a kind of industrialization. So I think, again, a holistic perspective here is the best way. And I mentioned the Eat Lancet report that I think had this really good approach that it looked into both food consumption, food waste, how this affects the land use, how it affects greenhouse gas emissions, and also they included aspects of animal welfare. So I think the approach that they have used is something we can gain insights from.
Anyone else want to comment on this as well? No, then I think I'll move on. I think one of the things that struck me with the report was also this very clear, quite dramatic numbers of the effect of heat. So that is what also one of the participants pick up on here. So death, disease, and reduced worker productivity due to heat is a core challenge, as shown in the report. There are few studies on this topic in the hottest regions of the world, but impacts are likely large. What do you foresee as being some main affordable and equitable solutions to adapt to increasing temperature in poor and already hot regions in the world without increasing emissions? I guess that goes to Melissa first, if you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, so a number of thoughts, including Kristen, I believe, who's asked the question. If you want to reach out to me via email, I'd love to put you in touch with one of my colleagues, Carol, who studies these types of topics, Carol Dolan, who's an author on the report, and I'm sure would love to have the conversation because this is what she does every day. But what I'll say is, in terms of, affordable and equitable ways to actually address productivity issues. I know that, in the United States, we have ways that we have, provided shading and portable shading for farm workers and outdoor workers. For indoor workers, there's of course increased use of air conditioning, which we do address in the report as being in tension, where you say on one hand, it's using a lot more energy. And if that energy is not carbon free, that means more emissions. But at the same time, from a health perspective, it's very important to be able to have temperature control, so this is cooling we're talking about, but also heating on the flip side, and being able to properly heat your home, which I think, Tanya, you touched on earlier, to protect the health of vulnerable populations and people around the world. So there is an interesting tension here. But in terms of affordable solutions, Carol will have a longer list, but I know we've talked about these kind of functional, in particular for outdoor workers, what can you do? And shading being the number one that is highlighted amongst the experts to me.
Great, thank you. So I guess our time is very soon coming to an end here. We've been able to touch a lot of different questions here. Any other comments first to the heat part here? Any other on the panelists? Doug?
It was a very interesting paper, which was either in Science or Nature last year, that discussed exactly this, the habitable part of the world and how this is expected to shrink dramatically. I think it was Martin Scheffer that I can provide that link, because that goes exactly to this. We are also working on this now in an upcoming paper together with people at Cicero and of course there are huge heat waves to be expected, and which obviously will have dramatic health effects, and also of course effects on food production and water supply.
Okay, very good. So I think we'll actually end it here. Great work from all the panelists. Thank you so much for answering all these different questions. And I mean, there's a lot of different questions here and topics and interesting things that could probably be a seminar in itself that has come up and been discussed briefly. So I have one final question that actually goes to Jeanette. I guess someone has been inspired by the seminar because they're asking, what are the requirements who want to be a member of the Center for Global Health? Over to you, Jeanette.
Thank you very much, Vebjørn, for moderating this session. It's been very exciting and to listen to you. And thank you to all the speakers and the panelists for a fascinating webinar. And thank you to the audience for following us today. And we have a website, and you can link on that to follow our newsletters and to be invited and alerted about future coming events like this. And I also, that in the same vein, wants to thank the Center of Global Health staff for making this successful event. So we have learned today that health is not created in the healthcare sector, and that the report, the Countdown report, calls for actions that warrants radical collaboration. And we hereby seek to mobilize the Norwegian academic milieu to action for planetary health, to protect human health. And I also want to tell you that if you missed any of the discussions, you could visit our website for the recording. And those of you that also sent their email will get an email about this. And please stay tuned to our other events, and welcome back another time. Thank you very much, all of you, and have a blessed weekend.